All right.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Data Ops Summit Canada 2022. I am your host, Garima Bajpai, and I have with me Manoj Agarwal. Before I introduce you to Manoj, I will like to introduce myself. I'm your host, Garima Bajpai. I'm based out of Ottawa, Canada. I'm the founder for the DevOps community of practice here in Canada, which has many chapters: Ottawa, Montreal, Toronto, Edmonton, Atlantic provinces. I'm also the producer of Summits Canada, two signature summits we do: Data Ops Summit and DevOps Summit Canada. We also have several other initiatives, and I'm also the chair for the CDF Ambassador Group and the Community Builder Group, and chair for the Canada Chapter DevOps Institute. So let's begin this conversation with Manoj. Manoj, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. So I am one of the leading experts in the field of artificial intelligence. I have 4 patents in artificial intelligence and machine learning. I have authored 2 books on technology. One is on globally scalable cloud infrastructure for large corporations who want to create global infrastructure. And another one is on security and enterprise firewalls to protect networks from malicious hackers. And I run a consulting company in Vancouver. So we provide data and AI consulting to mid to large scale corporations. And we also we also run a startup accelerator where we use our own proprietary artificial intelligence based technologies to help grow businesses. Besides that, I'm also the a community leader of Startup Vancouver, which is a community of about 2,500 entrepreneurs. And yeah, that's a very brief about introduction about me.
That's great, Manoj, and great to have you here today. So let's begin this fireside chat with you. And obviously, your background is really interesting. You have a lot to do with technology as well as people, right? So, my first question to you is humanizing data. And when we talk about humanizing data, why it is an important aspect of creating value from data.
Yeah.
Could you highlight your perspective on that?
Yeah, the key here is humanizing data or data helping us humans understand each other. These are the two same aspects of this statement, because once we realize that we are all thinking different things, like we all come from different backgrounds, we all come from different life experiences, we all have different preferences. And when, as a business or as an individual, we want to connect with our audience, we want to, get any initiative off the ground, we want to do anything which is, good for humanity. It could be for profit, non-profit, whatever it is. We really need to understand what people are thinking, what their passions are. So a very simple example could be, let's say, if I'm launching a ice cream store, I will love to understand what is the most popular flavor of ice cream that I should be selling. On the surface, if I just go around the town and I just visit some other ice cream stores, they'll have the usual flavors like, the strawberries and vanilla and chocolate. But then how much of that is, how much should I make every day of a particular flavor depends on how popular that is. And this can only be discovered by utilizing data and really understanding the patterns of behavior of people. And as we have seen as low stakes opinions like, okay, which colored dress will you like to wear today, or what flavor of ice cream, to a very, very high stakes scenarios where we are choosing the president of the United States or deciding whether UK is going to be part of Europe or not. All this can be determined by really understanding humans and data. And these two aspects are very much aligned together. So I hope that I was able to convey the answer.
Yeah, interesting points. And I think it's also evident that a lot needs to be done in this direction. Obviously, you come from a background which is very technology oriented, so I should start with this question that, how could we move the needle in the right direction to ensure that we are more inclusive in whatever data strategies we have, and how do you bring that data to a non-technical audience?
Mm.
So it's not only the technologists who can make use of big data, right? So when once you humanize the data towards by embedding processes to ensure that non-technical people also can participate, process, also make use of the data which is on the table.
Yeah.
So do you think that enough is being done, and if you see any other possibilities in this direction from we the technologists, what should we do to ensure that we enhance this perspective?
Sure. Yeah. So I think these two questions are related. So let's tackle the first one, which is inclusive. And there's a lot of talk about bias and things of that nature. So to that, what I respond is there are some long-term things that we need to do and short-term things. Long-term being, data only shows the bias that already exists in the world. So we cannot say, oh, this system is biased against certain certain class of people, certain religion, certain sex, or whatever that is, because it is just telling us the truth. It is just showing us the mirror of humanity, that these biases exist in the real world as well. So the long-term fix is, let's not blame the technology for this, but first remove our own biases. The short-term thing is that when, as technologists, we go about collecting data, because all these decisions, all these technologies like AI and data analytics and data ops and dashboards of various decision support systems, these are all based on raw data. So when we collect data as technologists, we should be very inclusive in that and say, hey, we should, let's say we are talking about geographical regions or people about people in certain areas, we should include people data from all kinds of ethnicities, all kinds of social backgrounds, all kinds of economic backgrounds. Now, granted, the practicality of the real life doesn't lend itself to get all this data, because in some cases we may look for data that belongs to minorities, but there may not be any data collected at all for decades. So these kind of practical challenges come when we implement data projects. Yet at the same time, we should not say, oh, just because it is difficult, we should not attempt to do that. So we should always attempt to do that as technologists. And these are all the things that will lead to that ultimate goal of non-biased data across the board. Now, talking about how to include other non-technology people, I think that's where everything starts, because as technology experts, we think that, oh, since we know all these things, we are the experts, we are the starting point. But no, technology itself doesn't serve any purpose. For the technology, for the sake of technology, has no meaning whatsoever. Only when we use technology for some outcome in the real world, it will have an impact. So it is imperative for technologists to work with business stakeholders and other stakeholders, because the whole story starts from there. They are the ones who can conceive of a problem and say, hey, won't it be great if we can lower our costs by 50%? What will it take? So let's look at the data to figure that out. Won't it be better if we can raise the quality of service we provide to our customers and get better reviews? Let's look at the data and what data is telling us about our level of service. So when these questions start from the business point of view, from the customer point of view, then we work backwards from there as technologists and implement these solutions in collaboration.
That's great points, actually. And then I move to the next question. Obviously, technology is there for our support and help. But when you come to a point where you need to validate and you need to audit, or you need to kind of build some practices around inclusive data, or, humanizing data, so that we do not create a big disparity. Data does not become a point of consideration which is introduced as, an unfair advantage, right, for a certain set of marginalized communities. So what do you feel about, how you when you look at the trends, do you think that there is a possibility and opportunity to build some kind of standards, policy guidelines, so that we can actually detect anomalies in data? We can also see if the data is distorted. If, let's say, from a policy standpoint, we can kind of audit these data in compliance perspective, towards inclusivity, how easy this data is to be used, how democratized this data is, what kind of data access is granted to whom. So do you think that there is some room, from entrepreneurial perspective, to look at these things and see if we can build some guidelines on top
Yeah,
of
yeah, definitely. I mean, guidelines, governance is part and parcel of any data project. I mean, data is becoming the next gold or oil. It's very, very powerful, very valuable. And so, providing guidelines on how to harvest that data, how to store it, how to collate it, how to analyze it, all these need to be matured. We are at the infancy of this industry. Like maybe 15 years ago is when we truly started to harvest data. uh, Mobile devices became ubiquitous and all that. So we are still at the beginning of all this, and a lot needs to be done to standardize these practices and ensure that we have equitable sort of representation. And that being said, as I said earlier, as technologists, we can try to make it perfect, but if the bias exists in the real world, it's still a challenge for the real world. As technologists, we cannot fix those biases by ourselves.
Right, excellent points. And in order to kind of introduce these kind of things, I think it's all also good to discuss about how humanizing data would pay off.
Mm.
When it comes to citizen technologies and citizen developers, which is a big kind of discussion point today, where we are introducing non-technical people to develop applications which are serving larger masses. It's also kind of evident that there is room for that discussion as well. So could you highlight your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think as we start to utilize data for at mass scale for affecting the lives of citizens, that will be changing the society for better. For example, medicine, let's take healthcare. So right now, when we need to visit a doctor, basically what they do is they say, okay, these are the symptoms, and based on historical data, whoever is experiencing this type of symptom, this is the diagnosis that we give. These are the medicines. This is how we treat the patient. But there's no personalization in this, where they cannot take into. I mean, they do ask, okay, do you have any allergies and things like that. But imagine if data can help us get down to the very bottom of our genome as an individual and say, hey, this person has certain genes which will be beneficial if we treat this condition through a very personalized method, or this person has certain genes which will react to this treatment, so let's not do it. Down to that level of personalization. Take education, for example. Today, we if somebody enrolls in a degree program or even a high school curriculum, everybody gets the same curriculum, even though some students may be much more knowledgeable in a certain topic. Some students may lag behind, but they all have to go at the same pace at the same time. And now imagine that if we utilize data to personalize each and every program, such that everybody gets to experience the full potential that they can explore. So these are some of the things. These are very small examples, but these are some of the things that we can really foresee that these will happen in our lifetimes, and will change how we utilize data for just human life and work, and how we conduct ourselves.
These are excellent points. Actually, you made me think about certain aspects around data, and I think usually what we do is we don't start with data, right? So we don't design with data, we don't develop with data, right? So from a technology standpoint, a lot of action is happening from a business stakeholder perspective. But what if we had the data when we start designing our applications or designing our solutions? As you mentioned, like education sector, if you have that data, that which educational modules would be more useful or more valuable for people who are getting into that degree program, right? So could you also even extend your thoughts in that direction? Like, are there any methodologies available for our practitioners, like the technology practitioners, to look at, like, how to design things with data into consideration? What is that kind of an approach which we can follow?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of resources. There are a lot of new executive learning programs being launched in universities. A lot of people come to us for consulting so that we can sort of, hold their hands and make them understand some concepts and implement these in their organization. So lots and lots of help and resources are available. All you need to do is recognize the power of data. One thing that happens is, as humans, uh, we live in a hierarchical society where a lot of decisions are made at the top, and now this technology is so good, the people at the top, they don't really understand sometimes what does it mean to utilize data, what does it mean to understand data. Now you can imagine being in their position. If they have so much to take care of, so many decisions to make, if something is not very relevant, if something is not very clear to them, that is put on the side, and other matters get more attention. So at the top level, we need to educate the decision makers about the use of data, how to implement it, and then it starts to trickle down. So some things are being done, but you also have to consider like how we can push it more, and then the people who are making the decisions, they are able to make proactive decisions to actually embrace the power of data. Mute.
Yeah, those are excellent points. I forgot to unmute myself because I was listening to your, perspective. One thing which comes to my mind, and this is also one of the very important aspect, when we talk about data so much, and we know that, we have 2 billion users connected on Facebook. We will have several billion devices in the next few years, who will not only consume data but also produce data, right? So it is also important to address one big challenge which we are foreseeing. And I was reading this report that ICT would contribute to the carbon footprint management more and more in the coming years. Today it's 30% as per one of the reports, sustainability reports I read, and Canada being one of the topmost countries to actually produce carbon footprint from an ICT dimension. So, how do you kind of see this? The dynamics getting changed, data being more and more important, but how do you address this challenge of not being data hoarders, but creating that those products through the valuable data you need? Because data has two sides of the coin. It also has shelf life, right? So you will have to store that data for compliance purposes, and on the other hand, you also want to kind of minimize the carbon footprint.
Yeah, I mean, see, there's we are, as I said earlier, it may sound like I'm repeating myself, but we are such at early stage of this development. I mean, if you think about industries like clothing industries, it has been around for centuries. Printing industry, like printing press was invented like around 1500. So it has been around for centuries. Here we are with information technologies, barely about like maybe a few decades old. And when we talk about data intensive industry, it's like not even 2 decades old, right? So it will be too early for us to compare the value of data versus the carbon footprint. Carbon footprint, to run a server that can host gazillions of bytes of data versus driving down one SUV to pick up a piece of bread. I mean, like we cannot even compare what happens in the world compared to the data. Now, the point is that data can only be collected in the present. We cannot go back in time and say, oh, you know what? I needed that data. Like, can I go back and measure that data for weather or, for global warming studies or whatever? The idea is that the footprint and the storage requirements and all that is so minuscule that it will be good for us to collect as much data as we can, because down the road we don't know what kind of studies we'll need to make where this data will be handy, right? So I'm of the opinion to collect as much data and then figure out later how to use it.
Oh, that's an interesting perspective, and it got me thinking about some of the challenging use case and also the long-term implications about, not collecting that data, which is currently available. Interesting point, and of course, it will get our audience thinking as well. Obviously, we are coming to an end of this discussion with you, but I would like to kind of understand from you my last kind of key takeaways that because you mentioned you are mentoring a lot of entrepreneur community. Startup Vancouver is one of the communities which you lead, right? So how do you see that these entrepreneurs are embracing the challenge of uh, data being a currency, and how do they kind of capitalize on this data based on the technology trends, the use cases which we have, and if you can also highlight in terms of what are the next generation use cases you see from data perspective that would be very, very valuable in the upcoming decade.
Sure. I mean, when we talk about entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs, first-time entrepreneurs, startup founders, unfortunately, they don't realize the power of data yet. And the reason is, there is no, this is not blaming anybody or anything like that. I went through that phase of being young and feeling untouchable and feeling I know everything. So when you're young, you don't want to consider anybody else's opinion. So data doesn't matter that much. But when I talk to these young entrepreneurs, I explain to them the importance of data, importance of learning about other humans, because that will lead them to the success they are fighting for every day, right? They are grinding for it. They are yearning for that success. And only when they understand who they are serving, who they are trying to connect with, they will get that success. So we in our mentorship, in our coaching, how we help other entrepreneurs grow their business, this is first and foremost, learning about other people through data. So we do what we can, but it's not nowhere close to what people really need to be doing. The second aspect is how is it going to affect the coming decades? I believe the next decade or two, the world will be totally different than what we are living today. Like, it will be drastically different in the sense that most of the work will be done by machines, automation. Most of the jobs where we are, jobs which are central to like collecting data, like, you know, there are some jobs where the sole purpose of that job is to collect data and organize data. For example, accounting, nursing, many other areas where that data collection will become automatic, because now we can deploy several sensors, several IoT devices to collect that data, collate that data automatically. Another aspect of jobs, like where repetitive decisions are made every day, driving jobs. We already have self-driving cars, and there are about 10 million jobs in US alone that depend on just driving. That's all they do, drive all day long. So you can imagine those jobs will be eliminated in the next 10 years. Now, that sounds scary to a lot of people, but then when you read history, these things happen on continuous basis. So when the car was invented, everybody involved in the horse industry was worried what is going to happen. But now people who were in the horse industry, who were able to adapt to the new wave of automobiles, they flourished. But people who did not adapt, they suffered. So as AI starts to take over, there'll be so many more opportunities for new kinds of jobs. But then you'll need to be really adaptable and sort of embrace that change as that is coming.
Excellent points, actually, and it will get our audience thinking about the agility, not only from the technology perspective but also from the human perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really important points you have brought in. I would like to thank you today for your time and insightful talk. Our audience would be kind of thinking about how to introduce data into their products, services, and probably they might reach out to you for more guidance.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
thank you very much for coming today, and stay tuned. There will be more talks and panel discussions moving forward. Thank you for
Thank
your
you.
time today,
Thank
Manoj.
you. Thank you.
Thanks.